Hello, and welcome back to Startup Equity Matters, the podcast that helps early stage founders and their teams easily handle their equity like pros. Last week, we spoke with Stuart Cook about exits and the power that exits can create. This week, we're talking to Cake's very own Alex Kazovsky about global equity, specifically global employee equity. It takes many forms and every country is different. Startups can create tremendous value with employee equity. We see thousands of people participating in it, and many of them couldn't have done it before. And this is really quite life-changing transaction for a lot of people. So we've been on this journey ourselves at Cake. We tried to have an advisor in India and an advisor in the US in the early days when we're expanding globally, and it was a horrendous it was a horrendous situation. The Indian advisor said, fine, I'm happy to come on and earn some equity, but I want it to be all properly done, based on Indian law. And we were like, whoa, we're just a small company, we can't handle all that. And as it turned out, so did our US advisor. And the only way we could find traditionally to solve that was to have like a full ESOP in each country, which was going to cost us tens of thousands of dollars and take tons of time and have all this ongoing management costs. So, with the way teams are so global now in startup land, we thought, wow, this is an amazing opportunity. So, I'm sure I'm not the only founder out there that's grappled with this. So Alex, as our global equity lead here at Cake, he's been central to solving this problem for us and for our customers. He himself is a super interesting guy, and he's got a pretty wild career background. He entered our team with an innovative and proactive approach to helping companies streamline their global equity. He's responsible for our overall equity management strategy, including equity compensation plans, local compliance, and long-term incentive structures. And he's also an integral part of our partnership team at Cake. So he's, helping to bring solutions partners on board, and they help Cake's customers with technical, legal, employment, and accounting valuation needs all around the world. So it's great to have Alex on the pod today. We're definitely going to get to know him better, but the nuts and bolts of today's session is helping founders and their teams to handle global employee equity. It is super complex, but it's very, very important, and we're going to spend the next half an hour or so really digging into that. So welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Trace. Great to be here. Love the podcast. Long time listener, first time attender.
I think you might be my number one listener. You always give me feedback, in the early days. I really appreciate that, mate. And look, you are a passionate guy. I've noticed that a lot, since you've joined Cake, and you've been really striving during your career to make a difference in the world. Tell us a bit about your career leading up to Cake.
Yeah. Oh, man, it's been a bit of a wild ride. I've been through so many different types of careers. So I started out in different boutique law firms, sort of made my way up to mid-tiers, and eventually I landed a spot at an in-house gig called Apt Associates. So Apt Associates was this amazing company that did international development and foreign aid. Essentially, when the Australian government privatised AusAid vacuumed it up into DFAT, they sort of privatised the international development industry. And Apt is one of the sort of developing and main contractors that did work in developing countries. So that was pretty amazing. I got to see some pretty fantastic programs in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and South America, where we were sort of pivotal in the reformation and reconstruction of like economic well-being for local people through government, public, private partnerships. And in particular, there's this one program in Southeast Asia called Investing in Women, where we essentially set up a microfinance fund, and in partnership with a bunch of different organizations and VCs, the Australian government, MFAT, we essentially gave microfinance loans to small women-led businesses in Southeast Asia. And that sort of kicked off this thirst and hunger for the VC world and helping people out in small communities who were essentially called the non-banked, as Muhammad Yunus calls it in his book, A World of Three Zeros, where we'd give them, access to loans where they couldn't get access to traditional banks.
I love it.
And yeah, it was just amazing to see the impact.
I love that. One of my favorite organizations is Kiva, which is, somewhat similar, micro loans all around the world. It's wonderful to see. And then you went on to Accenture for a little bit after that.
Yeah. So Accenture sort of poached me from that job. I was finishing up uni because I was actually working through uni full time and studying full time. So that was a bit of a crazy ordeal as well. But then when I finished uni, Accenture sort of took me into their sort of legal and contract management team, where I was managing one of the largest contracts in the Southern Hemisphere, actually. So it was all of the federal government contracts for the ATO and Bureau of Meteorology, Department of Finance. And then I was also managing specific state contracts as well. So Queensland Rail, City of Wanneroo over in WA. So yeah, pretty amazing experience.
Yeah,
But
great skill set. Great skill set for then going to have to build like a global equity sort of like hub that powers a platform, being able to handle that complexity and so many different contracts and international as well. Really feel like it was the perfect training for this huge equity project we've been tackling.
Yeah, exactly. It was very much stars aligned when Charlie reached out to me on LinkedIn. All this training that I'd been doing, setting up companies all around the world through Apt Associates and doing corporate governance funds and stuff like that. And then the sort of really hard technical learning at Accenture and doing, 70, 80-hour weeks and getting burnt out and going through that usual corporate process. It kind of it was all leading to the precipice of joining Cake. So, shout out to Charlie and yourself for finding me. And then, yeah, an amazing team for keeping me here and, sort of nurturing and developing myself. It's been an amazing story for the last year and a half and keen to see where it goes next.
Mate, you've got huge potential and ambition, and I think we're very good at finding great people and getting them onto the Cake team. And for those of you that didn't notice that, LinkedIn, so many of our roles have been just hired through LinkedIn, even organic LinkedIn. So, I think that's a little takeaway for anybody out there. And for those of you that are looking for Apt Associates, it's ABT Associates. So
Correct.
Worth checking out. And so, you're on a mission and you wanted to make your career really worth something. And, how do you see Cake helping to, improve economic outcomes? What sort of value creation do you see, from your Cake mission so far? And yeah, how's that been working?
Yeah, so it's kind of tugging on sort of the heartstrings that I sort of felt at Apt Associates, where we were really helping grassroots communities and foundations improve their livelihoods through, access to health, access to, institutional investing, access to education, everything like that. So I sort of see Cake on the same sort of scale and sort of, wavelength. So it's all about the redistribution of wealth on an international scale. So the fact that startups and talent are, super global now, more than ever, really, because of COVID, hiring with different, people with, vast amounts of experience. They're not just in Australia. They're going to be, someone in Africa who's had a super different life story and upbringing, and they've seen different problems to you and I, who, speaking a bit frankly, we lived in a white picket fence in Australia. We might have had our hardships, but those people, had to deal with starvation and you had to walk miles to get any sort of education or anything like that. Probably didn't have internet. So Cake is really, I guess, that catalyst for change by allowing people to issue equity to those people who didn't traditionally have access to private markets or any sort of productive assets that could help them. So if Cake ends up hiring someone in the Philippines, which we have now, and we end up having a super awesome exit, which I honestly believe we will one day, it's going to be life changing for those people.
Yeah. No, I love it. I absolutely love that part of cake. First of all, we've kind of democratized access to equity, in Australia, and now that we're on that mission globally, and I know that word's a little bit overused, but we're bringing the cost down massively. We're bringing the complexity down massively. We're making it available to millions of people that would have otherwise never had the ability to participate. Now we still need startups to have exits, and so we need to create real value out of this equity over time, and that's a big part of our mission as well. But look, it's absolutely wonderful to see some of the places where this equity is going. So, no, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Alex. We love having your passion and drive and experience on the team. So let's dig into the problem that we're solving here. So just to set the scene, startup in the US could have employees in 5 or 10 countries. A startup in Australia, or a startup in Europe, anywhere. They're going to have teams now all over the world. We've seen the rise of platforms that we partner with, like Deal and Oyster and Remote, to handle all these sort of employment elements. But how do you handle the equity? It's super, super complex. Every country has their own laws. Like it's super difficult for founders to tackle. I guess, where do we start? Let's start from the start. So I think the first countries we looked at were the big hubs, right? Was it Singapore, UK, US?
Yeah, Singapore, UK, US, India, and there was another one, wasn't there?
I think we looked at
Yeah,
Nigeria.
Nigeria. Yeah, Nigeria. So we started out with this very country-specific approach, and we thought, stand up the ESOPs there, make sure we understand the securities law and tax law there. But very quickly we realized people have the same issue as us. Like,
Yeah.
we have advisors overseas, we have employees overseas, and we want to give them equity.
Yeah.
And
Solving for the
I still
country,
remember.
like solving for the country where the company is based is one thing, but then in every country we looked at, we were like, hey, startups have got international teams. So yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah, I distinctly remember the conversation I had with Charlie within the first couple of months of me starting. I was like, oh, well, why can't we just give someone a startup concession ESOP over in Nigeria or Nepal or something like that? And he's like, well, it's a bit tricky. Securities law aspects apply to the jurisdiction that the recipient of the equity grant is in, and then
Yeah.
the tax law applies there. But the corporate law applies to where the plan is originated. And then so you have this conflict of laws sort of question where it's like, well, how do we set it up? So we spent months sort of debating it and sort of, spitballing what the approach would look like. Do we just have an addendum to a plan? Do we have a separate plan for each country? And we quickly realized like that's the traditional approach. Cake is the new school. We want to do it the new way. So we got a bit innovative and we sort of approached lawyers in all these different countries and we're like, how do you see this work? What's the most common form of equity in your country, and can we do that cross border? And so I still
Okay.
remember this
That's
this
the key, isn't
presentation
it?
that we
Because like
gave.
that's the key. Like if you go to a founder and you say, here's all the law in every country, like they're never gonna be able to proceed. You have to sort of have an opinion on the right way to do it. Otherwise, this is just impossible to achieve a proper ESOP. And as we know at Cake, doing the legal and technical part is important, but you have to build real value from your equity for it to be worthwhile. And if you just bog down doing all the legal contracts, you're never going to have time to actually have a strong relationship with your team, build the right culture, and get those value creation benefits from even having the scheme. So
Yeah.
how many countries have we got now, Alex, just out of interest, or how many countries have you tackled? This isn't about cake. This is not a cake ad, so I do apologize. A little bit more cakey because I've got Alex here, but this is really meant to be educational. Alex is a super interesting dude. He's tackling a super interesting product, and we're really here to educate you. So how many countries have you looked at, like, to
Mhm.
see how their employee equity runs?
Yeah. So personally, I've looked at about 44 different countries now. Um,
Ouch.
yeah, it's pretty nuts. It's super niche. I don't think I've really met or heard of anyone knowing or understanding how equity, securities law, tax law, corporate law, employment law works in that many different countries.
No, you previously you'd have to go to like the big four, and they charge you 100 grand for that. So No, it's an awesome bit of work that you've got going on. And so, like, through the time that you've been doing all this research, let's find some, I guess, fun and interesting tidbits and anecdotes for people about all the crazy stuff that's going on out there. Because you can imagine how different countries handle their equity. Like, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So what, let's start with the best countries. Like, where are and while we're doing this, let's talk about what's important. So I guess just quickly to take one step back. So as you said, so in the country that your head company is in, it has laws about what it can and can't do, right? So you have to first of all be aware of that and make sure that you got the right plan in place that allows you to issue, employee equity to whatever country it is. And then you've got the complexity on the side wherever the team member is and what the tax and securities law. So like if you're issuing shares or options, that's a security. So what do you need to do to make sure that you're not causing problems for both the company and your team member in that country? So like it's complex. What's the best countries where this is, I guess, as easy for the company and easy for the team member as possible?
Yeah. So I think some of the best countries you see out there with, equity frameworks or option frameworks are Estonia and Latvia.
Ah,
They're quite
nice.
progressive.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a massive startup hub there. There's some of the, I think per capita they have the most amount of unicorns and decacorns in the world, actually.
Yeah.
So that's pretty random.
They
But in
have like
terms of
they
the
have
equity,
blockchain. I think they have a blockchain-based ID system and all sorts of super progressive stuff
yeah. Oh,
in
it's amazing.
Estonia.
It's they call it the e-government. It's everything's digitized.
Yeah.
Um,
I was going to get
so
a
yeah, that
passport for there at one point, but never got around to it. I should do that one day, just in case all hell breaks loose. I can move to Estonia, if that's a good
yeah,
idea. I don't know.
cake on tour. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good idea if you're options and you're an option holder and your options vest and you want to exercise them or sell them because their tax rates are so low for options. I think they're about 15%, which is, a stark contrast to, Australia where it's about, 25, 30%, depending on
Oh.
your CGT aspects and stuff
Can you
like
go?
that.
Can you go snowboarding in Estonia? Because maybe I can go there after my exit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. There's some nice hills there. The
Nice.
countryside's lovely. But yeah, in terms of the different aspects that sort of, the levers that you pull in terms of what's a good policy stance, what's a bad policy stance.
Yeah. What does Estonia and Latvia
The
do well? So they got the good tax rate. What else?
Yeah, they've got disclosure requirements. They're pretty lax for private companies. You don't
And
have
what's
to,
what's a disclosure requirement?
so essentially, when you're giving options or a type of security to an investor or an employee or something like that, usually, like public companies, you'll have to attract disclosure requirements around what are your financial standings, what are your, solvency standings and stuff like that. Are you solvent? Do you, and the employee or investor can really understand your business a bit better by looking
Mm.
through your P&L and balance sheet and stuff like that. Um, so those are the sorts of points around disclosure. And then securities law comes in is like how many offers can you give in that year without it being considered a breach of the securities laws, and you have to provide a prospectus, for example, if you go over 50.
And a
So yeah, there's a
prospectus
lot
is
of
a very
complexity there.
complex disclosure document that's normally very expensive to put together, requires lawyers and
Yeah,
accountants and a whole bunch of
exactly.
rigmarole, and startups can't be doing that kind of crap. No one
Yeah,
can afford it, and
you're
no
not
one wants.
gonna.
One, you don't can't afford it. Two, it's too slow, and three, nobody wants to be dealing with that kind of rubbish
Yeah,
admin.
yeah, and if you're a startup in Series A, Series B, you're not going to spend 100 grand just to issue one equity offer to someone in Estonia or Latvia. Like it's
No.
nonsensical. So
So those countries are really sweet, really easy. What about the worst countries? Like, where is the disclosure bad, the tax rules bad, and just like no one knows what the hell is going on? And like
yeah,
whatever kind, like please don't like give us any hate mail from these countries. Like we're here to help, but we're just sharing our lessons.
I mean, if anything, it's a nice little call out for the policymakers to start thinking about how to nurture an ecosystem in their countries. So
Yeah.
Belgium and Germany are sort of the two countries that come top of mind. I'll talk to Germany a bit more because I know it a bit better. But essentially, for traditional options, they don't really distinguish between private and public companies in terms of the code. that they have over there. Like the requirements are super heavy. You have to register the scheme. You have to do everything by apostle. So like,
What?
physical signing and
Oh,
sending of the documents, apostilling
like with a
documents.
pen.
Yeah, with a pen, actually.
Whoa, and paper.
Um,
That means you need a printer. We don't even have a printer.
so yeah, that I mean the tax rates are super high as well, and you get taxed at vesting, you get taxed at grant. You can get taxed at grant, you get taxed at exercise, and you get taxed at sale again. So there's all these different taxing points.
How do they
It's just
compete?
really non.
How does Germany
I don't
compete for
know.
talent with this kind of scheme? And how have they not sorted this out? Aren't they like the center of the whole
Yeah.
European administration? Surely they can sort this out. It's like, look at all the countries around the world and like just choose the best ones and then go fix it. Weird.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the European Union, and there's this sort of community-led, I think, advocacy group called Not Optional, where they're essentially a European group of founders who founded it, and they've got all these people essentially signing up to it and being like, "Hey, Europe needs to change their policy stance on startups, and how do we incentivize startups to bring in talent?" And also, let them stay here if they want to exit. Because usually what happens is all these European startups essentially flip up to the US, where it's a lot easier to get investors, a lot easier to exit, a lot easier for the tax rates and stuff like that. But yeah, Germany essentially has been
Yeah.
doing phantom stock options for so long.
Yeah. So does that how people get around it in Germany? People just do phantoms. Do you want to just explain quickly what a phantom sort of stock plan would be?
Yeah, so a phantom stock option plan is essentially how I describe it is an NFT of your underlying security of the company.
Oh,
So
come on. Now you're complicating it. Can we just not
okay,
give
so it's just
it?
yeah, so it's essentially mirroring the value of your company. So you have your share price here, and then you can give someone a quasi security or a type of security bid that mimics the value of your company, but they're not actually getting any equity at the end of the day. So it's kind of like a cash
Hmm.
bonus when they exit.
So instead of owning an option or an equity, because that's really complicated, they have like a contract, which might be part of their employment contract that says under certain circumstances in the future, like it might be an exit or it might be, is it exit based or could it be profit based?
Usually exit based, yeah.
Usually exit based. So on exit, you get your payment and the payment would probably mirror what it would be if you had equity, but you can't have equity because the rules are too complicated. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's just tease out the NFT thing just quickly, because this could be an area where tokenization and blockchain actually help the cap table space. So do you want to just like chat a little bit about that, not to get too far off topic, but this is kind of an area where it could work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert, but essentially, this creation of all these decentralized, organizations and asset tools with blockchain and NFTs, it could be super interesting to sort of veer off in the traditional equity space, but to create these digital securities where essentially you're still having the value of the company tied to that security. And as the company performs and or even goes under, and there's sort of not so great situations, but as the company appreciates or depreciates, the value of those digital assets also increase. So to completely avoid the not avoid, but sort of circumvent the traditional securities laws and equity frameworks, you could essentially just give them a token of your company. And it could be a really interesting thing for the cap tables as well, because it's a lot cleaner, and it wouldn't be registered on the cap table as well. So you wouldn't, accidentally go over the 50 stakeholder threshold in Australia. So
Yeah,
that could be a really interesting sort of point of view
could
for
be
future
some.
startups as well.
I think there's some wins in there somewhere. I'm just looking at this. It's not optional.eu. And then there's a country
Mm-hmm.
ranking page, which is really quite interesting. It ranks countries based on plan, scope, strike price, minority shareholder and bureaucracy, employee tax timing, employee tax rate, and employer taxation. So, really interesting to see, that site. And I'll definitely be spending a little bit more time on that. I had seen it before, but I need to go back and spend a little bit more time on it. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. Good job, man. Cool. And then, like, what's something wild that you've seen, or like a couple of wild stories? You've been looking all around the world. Like, is there just like a crazy country that just has like almost no idea or is doing some real funky stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely countries who are behind the times, and whether that's a government thing or it's just the fact that startups aren't being started there. So Nigeria, their sort of securities laws and tax laws around stock options and equity grants, they're just they're not quite there yet. They don't really have a framework for startups. They don't have a framework for whether you value the company at the time of grant or exercise, and how you sort of do that valuation process and
Mm.
methodology formally. So,
Hmm.
I call them sort of a cowboy country. Same with the Bahamas. They don't even tax anyone there. So, if you're in the Bahamas and you're getting stock options, it's nice, good for you, and you're getting an exit. Um, but one of the most interesting ones that I've sort of come across is Brazil. So in Brazil, there's this two sort of tiered approach. So you're either getting a stock option grant as an employee or an EOR provider or a contractor, but it can be treated as remuneration or a benefit in kind. So then you're taxed at exercise and sale, and then because you're taxed at exercise as a income benefit, the company has to do withholding tax and stuff like that. So you don't want to go down that path. You want to try to structure your documents and the process and uh, the communication side of things to skew towards the non-employment aspect, which is the second tier. So in Brazil, there's also commercial arrangements. So if you get a equity grant, a stock option or a share, and it's structured in a way that is perceived by the local taxman authority that it's not a remuneration but a commercial arrangement, then you're only taxed at sale. So there's it's like a
Yeah.
two-pronged approach, and it's very dependent on how you talk about it.
From what I've heard with South America, almost everybody runs these things out of the Cayman Islands for this reason, because it's just so much complexity and variability throughout South America. So I think this is a lesson for policymakers out there, and we want it to be fair for the company, fair for the employee. We want the tax to be matched with the cash flow. Like it's an illiquid asset. You're not really getting any value out of it in reality until you get cash for it. And so all we're really asking is
Mm.
that we match the cash flow obligation of the team member to the cash flow of the asset. And that's so simple to do, and it's so fair. And I really can't understand why everybody just doesn't do this immediately. It's just like the most logical thing in the world. And for policymakers out there, it helps your country be more competitive, has more startups, and have more people working for startups in your country. And we know these are highly skilled jobs, and they're more highly paid quite often as well. And then you get this, stock option potential wealth transfer from, major countries into, perhaps countries with, less superior economies, or however we want to put it. I don't want to put anybody down. We're all where we are, but like wealth transfer into a country is normally a good thing, whichever way you put it. So yeah, really awesome to talk through that with you, Alex. I could actually talk about that quite a bit more, but we do need to sort of like truck along a little bit, and I might have to have you back on in a couple more months. We can dig
Yeah.
into it again, but
I mean, just before we do move on, I wanted to add to sort of
mm,
that point with one last thing. It's
mm,
also like the circular economy effect. So, like I saw at Apt Associates, we were investing in these women who started these businesses, but once they started growing and hired more women and bought more land or bought more tractors and stuff like that, it created a circular economy in the fact that they were able to reinvest in their local community, capacity build, and invest in other startups in their local country. So I think that's the another beauty of stock options worldwide.
oh, huge. Having exits and having people create wealth, and they quite often then become angel investors. And even if they don't become angel investors, other people in tech companies see that liquidity event, and then the whole ecosystem benefits. A huge aspect to stock options globally. So thanks for calling that out. That's cool. We also have one use case recently where we had a company issuing options into Nepal. Is it worthwhile calling that one out? I think it was just a real fun project for me to work on, and I'm sure
Yeah,
I'm sure you enjoyed that one.
yeah. This company called Geonodia, they're super interesting. Shout out to them. They're
Yeah.
essentially using drone technology in Nepal and various mines around the world where they're geolocating and doing spatial imaging of mines using drone technology. And they had engineers and site people in Nepal, and they came to us very early on in the journey of global options and this product. And they were like, "Oh, I really want to issue these options to these people in Nepal. Can you help me out?" And it would
Yeah.
have costed them like 20, 30 grand to get
He told
lawyers in
me
both countries talking together.
he told me he was thinking about it for over a year. And then it wasn't until we sort of showed him that there was actually a reasonable way to do it. And he's like, oh, thank goodness. Here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we managed to do that within what, like 2, 3 months. Found
Mm,
lawyers, which is not easy in Nepal,
mm,
who actually
mm.
understand the startup equity space. And then, yeah, the only funny, tricky thing that you had to do was say that, on exercise, you can't transfer money out of Nepal because their currency is quite weak. So they don't want to lose a lot of currency. So you had to either do a cashless exercise or use a bank account in a separate country to do that. So,
Nice. Love it. Love it. All right. So let's just keep things ticking along. Innovation, we want to innovate. We don't just want to like do things 5% better. Like equity's kind of been with accountants and lawyers for years. There's rules all around the world. They've been there for years. They're improving slowly. Wouldn't call that innovation. But how are you innovating in your role? What's kind of radical and awesome about this product that you're building and yeah, I'd just like to dig into that a little bit.
yeah. Yeah, I guess, the innovative part of my role is really trying to streamline equity for people globally, making it easy because not every country has frameworks, as we've talked about today. Some countries actually have tax advantageous frameworks, but trying to find a minimum viable product, essentially, treating it like a startup, really,
Yeah, that's
global
what I'm sort of
option.
saying.
And
That's what I'm sort of getting at. What's the nuts and bolts of it? Is it that like you used to have to go and have 5 meetings and read contracts and now so what's the future? How can every country make the flow of and treatment of equity easier so startups and their teams can build real value in their communities from their equity?
yeah, yeah, great question. Look, what I'd love to see, it might be different to what others might love to see, but an international standard for employee equity frameworks, having super clear rules around taxable events, more support for startups as well, vis-a-vis tax breaks and incentives, which will definitely require some like innovation focused policy stances from people and policy makers all around the world. But, you know, how do you set the strike price? What are the plan scopes? What are the treatment of minority shareholders who, option holders will eventually be? All the sort of, rankings that Not Optional does. That's sort of like the framework that you assess a country's equity frameworks. But it'd be great to see some more collaboration with different governments all around the world to have just a simple process and outline that startups can just, pick up and use. Kind of like the ATO has done with the startup tax concession. I think that's a great framework, and the work of Peter Dunn on that with the local government as a advisor, he's done an amazing job,
Yeah, I
and just
think
really, incentivizing startups to have tax beneficial treatments for their options.
the Australian scheme's pretty good. I like a lot of the aspects of it. Long exercise periods and the tax payments super aligned with the cash flow, that's going to come from the exit. Looks like a good scheme, reasonably open and inclusive. A few funny little limitations that I think are improving, but overall pretty solid scheme. What else could we see
Yeah,
that's gonna help drive this sort of space forward?
yeah. I mean, I guess labor issues as well. So, making sure that companies and the countries themselves are treating, labor separately and employment separately to equity. I think that's only fair. It is kind of a bonus in some way or an added perk. People shouldn't be treating it as remuneration, in my opinion.
Until they
But
get value
yeah,
from it,
again,
right? When they can sell it, when they actually get some cash, like getting a bit of
yeah,
equity in a company. I mean, could be worth 50 grand one day, 10 grand the next, and 200 grand the next, and 20 grand the next. And, like,
yeah,
how the hell is the tax regime supposed to keep up with that? So let's just follow the cash flow.
exactly right. I mean, that's what it all boils down to, the cash flow and following that sort of structure.
Nice.
And speaking of cash flow as well, like, a great sort of thing that would boost this space for startup options and global equity would be secondaries. We see in the market that's a really hot topic today, and secondaries are getting swept up by large private equity firms and global VCs like Tiger and KKR and stuff like that. So having a healthy secondary marketplace can also really boost not just obviously the option holders exits and stuff like that, but it can also just boost the ecosystem for startups and scale ups globally. If people can join a job and not have to go into a traditional big four straight out of uni and join a startup instead, and know that there's liquidity in those assets that they get for joining people. I mean, I would have definitely, I might have still gone to Accenture, but I probably would have joined a startup a lot earlier.
Yeah, I think it creates more opportunity and brings better people in, and companies are staying private longer, as we know. So I think secondaries are a critical part of the successful evolution of employee options and equity schemes. I know you're very passionate about that. So watch this space, Alex? It'll be something we'll be working on together in a little
100%.
while. Well, maybe next time I have you on, might be to talk about that, but we'll see. We'll see. And look, we always finish with a couple of, questions for all our guests. Sometimes it's one or the other. Today you've got both. So what is, the biggest fuck up you've seen, I guess, working in and around these global equity plans last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, perfect probably use case for, whether it's mismanagement through the finance team and structuring the documents correctly or the timing of it all. But Stripe recently had to raise, I think, $6 billion just to cover their tax withholding requirements and also the exercise prices for all the employees.
Do we have to say,
they had a bunch of.
Do we have to say allegedly, or is that like actual news?
Yeah. No, that's actual news. That's big news. That's out there, public information.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of like RSUs and options and stuff like that were coming up to their vesting dates. I think the 10-year time frame in the US for ISOs was a big key one, and then RSUs as well. When they vest, you have to pay tax on that and the exercise price, otherwise they lapse. So they had a big sort of tax bill, and employees wouldn't have got their buyouts essentially if they hadn't have covered that. So that was probably one of the biggest.
Arguably the best private company on the planet. They've had a few timing issues lately. It would seem from the outside. I'm not privy to the board decisions, of course, and I'm sure they're overall doing a wonderful job. But a bit of a bummer for them and that cost and having to take that action. And hopefully the outcome for the employees was good. I don't know the ins and outs. I mean, was there an issue for the employees? Was there like a price issue? Sort of how did that work on their side of things?
Yeah, so I think my understanding of it is they had to obviously mark to market when they raised the $6 billion. So obviously the down round does hurt the valuation of the company and the valuation of the employee shares. But at the end of the day, those employees had been around for a long time, or most of them had been.
Yeah.
So they still got a fairly sizable premium on those securities. So I think all in all, it's a great outcome for both the employees and the company. But yeah, it's definitely showing how tricky this space can be and how complex it can be. So get the right advice.
You don't want to be liquidating. Yeah. You don't want to be liquidating on 2023 prices if you don't have to be. So that might have been a real tricky one. And finally, at Cake, we're very passionate about creative, healthy lifestyle and how your health is a core factor in having a great life. How's that been for you, mate? I ask people this question all the time. You're on the inside. How has our CHL enabled and empowered you, and what do you think of it?
No, it's equally as great a question. So I guess to go back to the sort of my work life history, people always talked about, and my mentors always talked about having a really good work life balance. And for me, that it was a bit, it didn't really make sense for a lot of the time because I was working really late hours at all these big companies and really putting in the grind because I truly thought that they were meritocracy. So I sort of hustled and wanted to work my way up, but I quickly realized that work life balance can't exist if you are doing those sort of crazy hours, and you have to really take care of your health. So I started burning out, and within 6 to 8 months of being at Accenture, and probably no fault of theirs. It was probably just my own sort of really wanting to improve and obviously climb up the ladder. But what I quickly realized was, instead of work-life balance, it's more about work-life harmony. And that's the kind of key phrase that I keep, plugging around to everyone. Don't focus on balance, focus on harmony. So that's the
Yeah.
beauty of Cake and being in the Cake team, because, we openly say to our employees, like, go have a surf at lunchtime, or, go for a walk around the park if you need to, work remotely. And we're really sort of, push people to be their best selves. And Kim, and your own vision for that, it boosts productivity. It boosts employee happiness. If we had an NPS score as employees, I think ours would be pretty awesome and pretty high, to be honest. So yeah, work life harmony is what I'll close out with.
Nice one. No, it is high. We use the is it Culture Amp? We use the Culture Amp system. Very happy with how the team's running. I'm glad you're enjoying it. We like if you're working on something that you care about, it's not so much work, and I think it's okay to work hard. Like, it's actually part of life, having discipline, finding something you care about, working hard. I think it's part of having a great life. I don't think it should be admonished, or it's if you're working on things you don't care about for people that you don't like,
Yeah.
and where you feel like your morals or ethics are being eroded, that's where people talk about work-life balance, because their work is so shit.
Yeah,
If you
it
actually
shouldn't
work,
be
and
it
of
shouldn't be
course you
your
need time for
work
family.
or
Of
your
course you need,
family.
yeah, you need time for work, you need time for family. You need time for all those things. Definitely, I'm not saying work all the time, but it certainly helps when you've got something awesome to work on, which we think we do at Cake, and I'm glad you agree. So long may it continue, and we love your ambition at Cake as well. So we'll keep finding you fun stuff to work on as we change equity for startups everywhere. So look, Alex, thank you. You're a good man. It's great to have you on the team. I think we've hopefully educated people. It wasn't too much of a Cake sales pitch. I think in the end we walked the tightrope pretty well. And hopefully we shared some stories and kept it light enough as well, which is part of our goal with Startup Equity Matters. So thanks everyone for listening in. For me, this was my favorite one so far. I just love global teams, love global equity. I love jamming with Alex on this stuff that I really, really care about. So thank you, Alex. Great job. And
Thanks, Jess.
sayonara.
Ciao.